Hi there all. Well, David's given the introduction as to what we want to talk about, so might as well get straight into it. Basically, the electricity issue is two parts to it really, and think about, say, if you live out in the country and you want to water your garden. You're going to have a great big water tank that might well have enough water in it or might not, but you've also got an issue about the water pressure too. And it's the same with the electricity. Is there enough actual energy to start with, but then also is there enough actual network and to supply it at the right times? Okay, so it's a little bit like water pumping issue. But New Zealand, I mean, as the other speakers have said, and as most of you probably know, you converse to electric vehicles, New Zealand is going to be better off with electric, environmentally and financially, versus petrol cars, without a doubt. However, the amount of savings that New Zealand makes on both environmental and financially depends on when the time people charge up their electric vehicles. So that's a big issue, and so that's why we want to sort of talk about a bit today. If I can get it to work. So one, or was that two slides then? So the impact of carbon emissions, I think we went on a few slides there, didn't we? So that's it. So in terms of speaking about the energy to start with, so this is your kilowatt hours, if you like. At the moment, we've got about, if everyone had an EV, no petrol cars in New Zealand, we'd need about 20 to 25% more power generation. If heavy vehicles were also converted to being electric, we'd need about another 10%. As Liz said earlier on, we've got about 25% of already consented but not yet built generation. And you've also got TY Point, which, as most of you all sort of know, is on a little bit of interesting financial footing and is always talking about potentially closing down. That adds about another 13 megawatts. 13% should it actually close down. So we could actually easily convert the whole vehicle fleet, including heavy vehicles, on what we've just got consented today, and if TY Point closes down, which is probably most people would think will be likely in the next 30 or 40 years. And so you also think about new generation coming on that's not consented now. New Zealand has got ample electricity in terms of kilowatt hours. So we don't need to worry about kilowatt hours, but we do need to worry about or think about what time people are charging. So as Liz also said, we're about 85% renewable at the moment. We're targeting a higher percentage. However, what's mostly consented and not yet built is renewable, and this is sort of like your base load stuff. It's your wind. It's generating over a fair chunk of the day, but has its peaks and troughs, when the wind is blowing and that sort of stuff. And so what actually happens is when New Zealand has a peak in your worst winter days, New Zealand electricity supply is peaking, actually that's when your non-renewable generation is needed. So that's when your polluting power sources come on. They don't come on a summer day like this because it's not the cheapest form of power supply, but they are on those worst winter days. So if we add to electrical peaks through EVs, then most likely we are going to need some more polluting generation. So that's something that we really want to try and avoid as a country. And so it's a question of that charging time. So if we can actually shift things off-peak and spread them out, we can actually really use our renewable resources, not need to build any more polluting generation, and actually keep network costs down, and everyone saves money, basically. So in terms of that, if I can just go to this before I actually talk about the shifting a little bit more in terms of load. For us at Orion, there's going to be some impacts. There's obviously going to be some people who will want to charge up at 5 or 6 o'clock on a winter night when the New Zealand power system and our own power system is peaking. So to give you a bit of a difference on it, our maximum power supply at the moment for a winter evening, 5 to 6 p.m, we keep it at about 600 megawatts. Overnight, last night, warm night, still hot water cylinders being charged up and that sort of stuff, we're at about 300 megawatts. So there's a doubling in power basically from your off-peak times to your peak times. So if we can keep EVs off charging at peaks as much as possible, then as I say, we won't need to build so much polluting generation, we won't need to build so much network. The other impact for us, aside from the overall network thing, is a few of you have probably read about overseas. They're putting in these great big new charging stations, so replacing your Shell and your BP petrol stations with EV stations. So what they're building out over the moment over in Europe is charging stations that have got 6 350 kilowatt chargers. Now, no car at the moment can take 350 kilowatts, but they're building the charging stations knowing that they're coming. And so what they're doing is and that's quite a hefty load, 350 kilowatts, so 6 of them, we're going to be supplying a lot of these charging stations in the future dotted around the city are going to require quite large power supplies in their own right. But that's not a problem for us, that's business as usual. In terms of a large business opening up somewhere, we can do that. The big question for us is how can we manage this 80 to 90% of charging that's going to go on at home so that it's not actually occurring when people arrive home from work, it's actually occurring overnight and being spread overnight. So for us it's 2 challenges: shift people off peak, but also we don't want everyone charging up at 9 o'clock instead. So at the moment in Orion's network, day-night pricing, a lot of retailers, a lot of people are on this pricing that at 9 o'clock a cheaper rate of power kicks in. If everyone starts charging at 9 o'clock, that's going to have a huge impact on our network and the power supply because there's going to be voltage issues and there's going to be capacity issues, particularly down at the lower end of the network. So what we've got to do is come up with some sort of system that actually shifts people into charging at night, but also make sure they don't all start charging at the same time. Because you can imagine down your street, say a typical feeder feeds 50 homes. If in the future all those homes have a 7 kilowatt charger, which is quite possible the way it's sort of going overseas, then that's an enormous increase in electricity just down that street at one time. So that will be where we run into issues. So we've got to spread it out. And so this is just talking about why we manage network power load. So at the moment, many of you will know that we sort of control your hot water systems, or a fair chunk of your hot water systems. You get a cheaper price in return, but you allow us to manage it. And so we can sort of turn on and off your hot water cylinders, still pretty much guarantee you hot water in the morning when you need it, but we can sort of manage when that comes on or off. And by doing that, we sort of keep the line at that red line. So worst winter days, we're up around 600 megawatts. If we weren't actually managing hot water cylinders, we'd probably be up around 700 megawatts. Now that just for Orion and the Transpower network equates to probably about $150 million. So by managing your hot water cylinders, we're saving an investment of about $150 million, and obviously as customers you're getting cheaper power bills by doing that. And so we want to be doing that sort of management to lower those peaks for EVs. And so this is a sort of chart showing why we need to spread out that EV charging. So basically there's 2 things. There's the red line is our current network load. Now this is done on the basis of 30% penetration of EVs. Entirely realistic sort of scenario by 2030 to 2040, 30% of cars out there being EVs is in keeping with all world sort of wide predictions. If we actually had people charging up when they came home, then we'd be up at that blue line. So that's adding another 200 megawatts of power, $300 million just for the Orion sort of build. So we obviously don't want to have that because, if you think about Orion, it's just between the Rakawa and the Waimak, about 10% of New Zealand. If all of New Zealand was doing that, then obviously there's going to be a lot more peaking generation need to be built that, as I say, is polluting. So we want to avoid that situation where everyone charges up when they first come home. But we also want to avoid that situation of the black line, which is if people are actually on time of use pricing at 9 o'clock, they get cheaper power, their electric vehicle comes on, then all of a sudden we're going to get an instant 100 megawatt boost across our network. Now that causes real issues down for voltage and capacity. So what we've got to do is actually shift, if you like, this chunk here needs to be shifted and flattened and put into there. And if as a country we can do that, we're going to save big dollars and we're going to save the environment. So that's our challenge going forward as an industry and regulators and the government, etc., thinking about how we can actually achieve that. And part of that might be from community goodwill, Part of it might be by smart EV charging and, offering rewards to homeowners who are willing to actually say, look, I don't really care whether or not I start charging at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, just so long as by 6 a.m. in the morning I've got a fully charged vehicle. So Orion, just as you manage the hot water cylinders and you spread out when you're charging them up, happy to do the same on the electric vehicle. We don't know yet what consumers are willing to do that and what they need in return in terms of dollars. So that's something we've got to be working through as an industry going forward and as the government. So that's what we're trying to do. And obviously some parts of our network are going to be harder hit than other parts of our network. The UK's sort of found we've got fairly low solar penetration in New Zealand still. The UK's found that 70% of their solar panels go in about 30% of their network, sort of wealth sort of thing, wealthy areas have more solar panels, but also this keeping up with the Joneses effect and talking to your neighbour across the fence. People encourage other people to actually install things. So what we're expecting is with EVs, it's not going to be an even spread across the community of whereabouts EVs are. There's going to be pockets where there's lots of EVs sooner rather than later, and those will be the low voltage parts of our network that we need to watch first. So Richard's just going to tag in now, and so he's going to talk a little bit more about that low voltage impact, which is, effectively your line or your cable that runs down your street rather than the big substation level.
Thanks, Steve. Can I ask a question of you first? How many people here are regular EV drivers? Okay, maybe a third. How many are thinking of changing so far after today? Excellent. If everybody in New Zealand went to electric cars, the power industry can cope. Liz mentioned earlier in the day about the amount of power that was consented. I've got a list here that I'll leave over the front there of the actual sites and the quantities over the next 5 years. Lots of wind generation, which you can't always depend on. Today there's maybe 600 megawatts. Over the last week there's been times when there's been no megawatts of wind generation in New Zealand. Can we go to the picture with the power pylons? In terms of having enough electricity for your cars here, the issue isn't the bulk supply. There's people in multiple companies in New Zealand, it's their job to make sure there's enough electricity delivered to the general area for your cars. You could think of it, if your car actually needed AA batteries rather than from the grid, and a company needed to deliver you the batteries, the bulk delivery to Christchurch, which is done by Transpower, is like the train. The train can bring all the electricity needed to a couple of distribution points in Christchurch, Bromley and Islington. And then Orion, the local delivery company, has trucks to take it around the suburbs. And then there's courier vans to get it to your street or cul-de-sac. And it's that last bit that gets interesting. The capacity's there, but with growth, more capacity will be needing to be built, which will cost more, unless it's well managed. So if you're in a metropolitan area, there's a kiosk like this, maybe a couple hundred metres from your place. It's easy to have lots of power to that site. It's the 200 metres from that site to your place that could get congested. If you think of living down the cul-de-sac with those courier vans coming to deliver you your batteries, 1 or 2 deliveries, no problem. As you get multiple deliveries, multiple cars, you get congestion. You could build another road to deliver it, or you could have some coordination of that delivery. And that's what people in the power industry are looking at now. So, an example, 3 days from winter, there's 3 features to note here. In this first day, the power load overnight is low, rises up during the day, into the next day before you get a trough. So in that first day, there's no spare capacity during the day without building more network, which costs money. get past 1 a.m. in the morning and that trough opens up, lots of room for delivery there. The next day there was a trough during the middle of the day. You can't guarantee that. The trough is finished by about 7 o'clock in the morning, so there's a window of opportunity between 1 a.m, 7 a.m, that it's really good to have electric vehicle charging happening in, because more network doesn't need to be built, so there's no more costs. It actually makes the price of power cheaper. A lot of the delivery costs are fixed, so if there's more electric vehicles needing electricity, there's more electricity being delivered for the same cost, so the per unit price comes down. I guess you could think of that as a cross-subsidy between the people who can afford electric vehicles to those who can't, because their power price can be lower than it would be otherwise. So what we're looking to do to see if we can fill up that trough in a coordinated way, smart charging if you like. So most vehicles don't travel very far, don't need a lot of charge every night. That's the red line on the picture there. If that happens between sort of 2 a.m, 4 a.m, no impact on the network. The blue line is for the vehicles that have gone a bit further, maybe 50 to 80 kilometres during the day, 2 or 3 times the average. That also fits in the trough easily. And if you've done 100 to 200 kilometres, that's the yellow line. Can still deliver that without creating a new peak. So most days, the network delivers electricity fine, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's not delivering. We have operators that go out and fix it, but that takes time. So when I was putting this together, I had a look at the outages on the network at the time. So I took a screen grab from the Orion website that shows the blue spanners are planned maintenance, where people know the power is going to be off for a planned reason. The orange one is an unplanned outage up at Annet, so quite a way to drive to. In that case, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning, the power went off. For 100 customers, it was off for 100 minutes. That's slightly longer than average. That's partly to do with the time of day and the distance to get there. For 7 customers, it was off for nearly 8 hours. That's because there was no way to switch them on without fixing the network that had broken. Sometimes the outages are caused by faults in the equipment. Sometimes people drive into power poles. Sometimes the wind blows trees onto power lines. Sometimes contractors dig up the power cables. On average, you can expect about 90 minutes, 4 out of 5 years, where we won't be delivering power. The numbers range quite a bit though. So there, on average, 90 minutes. We're targeting to bring that down a bit with a series of projects. Is that an example of a power outage? I'll leave that to the experts to recover. That's pretty slick. Orion can do that in some instances. We're looking to invest to do that more often. So the rural townships, on average 90 minutes, so Darfield, Taitapu, Dunsandel, Rolleston. We've got a project underway now that'll bring that down to more like 10 minutes, and that involves putting in remote control, indication and switching. We don't do that everywhere because of the cost, but with targeted work we can make quite a difference where there's a group of people. In the city, the average is normally lower, more like an hour, and typically the worst case is still under 2 hours, depending where you are. In the central city, we've got a piece of work underway to improve that for the bulk feeders in there. That'll get it down from about an hour to about quarter an hour, mainly through remote switching. So what does that look like in terms of your mobility? How does that impact your charging? So for home charging, 90 minutes without power. If you're charging at about 8 amps, that looks roughly about 10 kilometres of range that you don't have. So my question for the EV drivers here, is that 10 kilometres material to you? Nobody's indicating that is material. The other case is the fast charging. If you're depending on a fast charger and that's off for 90 minutes, there's usually another one nearby. In Christchurch, there's Morehouse Ave and Northwood at the moment. Soon to be some in Rolleston, Horsell, Darfield. If you're heading south, there's Rakaia and Ashburton. Heading north, there's a gap, so that's to be fixed. So the question we had, do we have enough electricity to support EV growth? The bulk generation, yes, there's lots consented. The bulk delivery, yes, that's bread and butter. There is a number of water bottling plants just announced for up around Belfast. It's the equivalent of about 4,000 electric vehicles. There's people sitting next to me in the office that are working on developing the network to cope with that. It wasn't expected, but it's just normal planning. The last 200 metres, that work depends on the people who are driving electric vehicles. If you charge in that trough, then it's easy. If not, there'll have to be more network built down your street, which will come at a cost. So the system can cope with it, it just depends on the time that you charge. So that's all we had. If there's anybody with questions, if we could have the microphone, please, for the people with the questions, so as everybody can hear it, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so basically, the no-brainer is why you want to charge the trough, but how are you going to actually verify that that's what they're doing? You can't ripple control a three-pin plug. You need special hot water attachment for hot water cylinder. So yes, you can decide what card's being used at that time slots, but you don't know whether it's an EV charging thing. So how do you verify for the charge owner? Yes, you check the card because you're helping us save network expansion costs.
So two parts to the answer, I think. Ultimately, we will build to deliver whatever people want. If they want to charge at any time, then we'll build and charge for it accordingly. In terms of doing something smarter, we've drafted up a specification that we can engage with other people in the industry and with service providers that consumers will be able to use, that will give us feedback on what they're doing. Optimistically, we'd be ready to pilot something for next winter, but that's early days.
What sort of tech structure are you talking about? Are you talking about some sort of meter or a timing control system that they're using to charge the car?
Coordinated signalling, so not a metering,
Right.
using various communication methods depending what service providers want to offer, and maybe a dongle, maybe a box, maybe a charger. Ed talked earlier in today about the EVNex charger. That sort of technology is the possibility.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the EVNex charger, but I'm just thinking that I don't see any incentive for someone who has a home charging cable to want to buy an extra, like a specific car charging thing, unless they need a really rapid charge. Yep. Most people stay at home all night and then go to work the next day.
Yep. So the EVNex stand, I think, is just out there that Ed can actually touch some gear. It could be that there is a rebate, a bit like at the moment there's a rebate with the hot water cylinders. It's been around for decades, so everybody's used to it, doesn't see it as a rebate. At the moment, Orion has got a trial in the Cashmere area where people have got solar PV, battery storage and hot water cylinders with a controller that Orion can signal when the battery should be charged and when they should be discharged, and they're offered a rebate for being involved with that. That's a model that we could use with the electric vehicle smart charging.
But that's exactly the challenge that you're talking about, and we have to try and find a solution between somebody like Orion and the community, otherwise costs go up. It's not a great solution to build a bigger network to cater for keeping as Steve described. So that's what we're trying to do, and any suggestions would be fantastic as to what would stimulate that change of behaviour or encouraging people to fill those troughs, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, yeah, someone else has a question, but my thoughts were something simple and cheap way of verifying it would be in everyone's best interest.
Yeah, no, that's useful. Do we have another question? It's certainly Steve and
Richard.